I was not very clear regarding why there was a message sent out. So I will explain that in class when it is being recorded.
I was just like very close to sending you an email saying, oh, are you referring like directly to me?
No, it was a blanket email sent to the entire class.
It was posted on the forum.
Yeah, it was on the forum.
That's how I knew it was.
Yeah.
Message.
All right. Okay, several things. Okay, first of all, several things that I need to kind of go over. The first one was, why did I send an email, I think last week. It was because, there were some disturbances during the class, and it was a little bit distracting. And I think it is best not to, cause, that kind of distraction in the class. I really appreciate it if the classroom, kind of stay, not just me talking, that's not the point, okay? I really appreciate questions, comments and other things, that contribute to the class and what I'm teaching here. Anything that's related to computer science is actually fine in this class. But anything that's outside, of the context of this class, I would like to have those, topics stay outside of the classroom. The class only lasts 1 hour and 20 minutes. So if you really have something to share with your friends that is funny, but it is kind of out of the context of this class, please wait until the end of the class. Okay, I really, really appreciate it. The email was not directed to you, as in the singular, term. It was just a reminder to the entire class that I really want the class to be distraction-free, unless the distraction comes from me and it is related to the class. And you guys can tell me and say that, Tag, I think you just went over that line. It is no longer related to the class. Stop that, okay? That's fine. Sometimes I get a little bit overboard and do things like that. Okay, so we'll start with the distraction just like that right now. There was a question of, what is the uptime of my server? For those of you who don't know what an uptime is, it's when you maintain a computer server, a computer that other people can access. The question is, how long do you have to shut down the computer for the stability and also for security purposes? Because sometimes, how do you use Windows? Especially on the laptop. Do you guys, shut down your computer every time, or do you put it in suspend or hibernation mode? Hibernation? Okay, so if you put your Windows in hibernation mode, that means it's not, rebooting. I mean, the operating system is actually just, it's not running, it's just sleeping. So how often do you actually restart your computer?
Once a month.
Once a month? Okay. But you have a Mac, it's different.
Yeah, that's true.
How about from Windows, people who use Windows? Once a week? Daily? Okay. Daily? All right. So I'm going to show you guys, how Moodle does it. This is the actual status from the Moodle server. So we'll go to. So now you know the login name to Moodle. Ooh.
Oh, we can start reinforcing now.
Okay, so the current uptime is 67 days. And the load average is so and so. In other words, the computer has not been restarted in 67 days. I believe 67 days ago was the beginning of this semester. I typically try to maintain the computer between semesters, so this way I bring the system up to date, apply all the security patches, and let the system reboot at the very beginning of a semester, so that during the semester I don't have to do anything that would disrupt classes and the offering of the content and whatnot. Okay, so I think 67 days ago is just about right. I mean, that's really about 2 months ago, at the end of January, which is when the semester started. Okay, my desktop computer has probably uptimes of usually a month or so, because my desktop runs a slightly different version of Debian. This is called the stable version of Debian, which means changes come very slowly, and most of the changes that get its way into the stable version, they are, guess what?
Stable.
Stable, exactly. So they don't need any additional changes. My desktop runs SID or Debian SID. Debian SID is also known as unstable. Okay, so sometimes bad changes slip by, and then people know, oh, okay, this is not good. Let us fix it. So that's why the fixes come more often with the city distribution. So on my desktop, I typically have to reboot maybe every week or two or so. So
Still more stable than Windows. Still more stable than Windows.
Well, I would say it's maybe about the same. Maybe slightly more. But even unstable is actually pretty stable for the most part. All right. So, are there any questions related to this server administration thing?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
What's so bad about Windows?
What is so
Windows
bad?
for as long as I can. I have never had an issue with Windows.
Lucky you.
I've never had any issues with Windows, and I do everything on my computer.
To me, the first issue is I have to pay for it.
Yeah.
Okay. That's my password. Go ahead. Because I got Windows 7 for free from the school.
Right.
And anybody in the computer class can get Windows 7 free, and actually Windows 8 now. And it's all free.
And I don't have to relearn how to use the interface every time there's a new version. So to me, it's not only whether the product, how the product is, but it's also the philosophy of the developer. In other words, certain things that Microsoft does, I just do not like. They bully everybody else. Okay, you can say that most big companies are big bullies, but Microsoft in particular is a very strategic bully. They force hardware manufacturers like Dell and Gateway to use their operating system. Dell one time wanted to offer Linux as an alternative operating system. In other words, you can go to a Dell website and you can say, I want to select Windows and pay this money for a license of Windows, or I want to just use Linux, or I want my computer to have no operating system. Let me choose what I want to install and take some money off of the price. And Microsoft basically strong-armed Dell to get out of that practice. Do not let your customer have a choice whether to have Windows pre-installed or not. And I think that is really a little bit more
But you
than.
have a choice to keep Windows on there. You can always put Linux on there whenever you want.
But
Yeah, but you have to
Yeah,
pay
but
the
you
license
don't have
already.
the choice to not pay for Windows.
They're not giving you a choice not to install Windows, not to pay for the license of Windows. That I think is one of the things that I really object to.
For example, I have two laptops. I have my Mac and I have a PC laptop as well. My PC laptop runs Ubuntu. I didn't have the choice to not buy Windows when I bought that. I had to buy Windows or buy a license for Windows to buy that laptop, and that's ridiculous.
Yep.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But can the same be said about all big corporations that bully like Costco, Walmart, or BofA or Wells Fargo into getting customers to do what they want them to do, or force smaller companies or buy them out to do what they want them to do? Except Microsoft is more public, has been more publicized about it than anybody else.
There are some bigger bullies, in the software industry than others. For example, Sun Microsystem, has never really been known as a big bully, but Oracle, is a big bully too. So, it sometimes the company philosophy really, really matters, and Microsoft, just has, at least in the past, has done things that I really strongly disagree with. All right. Well, you guys can dig more into that, when you have time. But for now, we'll go back to subroutine 1. That's your homework assignment for today. It is already past due, and we'll go over that and let me explain the concepts. And then after that, we'll go back and talk about return values, okay? Because that's the current topic, and it can be confusing. Yep.
When
Go
will the
ahead.
next exam be?
Your next exam is going to be right after spring break.
The week? Is it that Thursday or that Tuesday?
Okay, let's schedule a practice exam on the Tuesday after spring break.
And then Thursday have the exam.
And then the
Alright,
week
cool.
after that, we'll have the actual exam.
Alright.
So the next Tuesday after that week?
So it'll be Tuesday after spring break, it would be a practice exam, and then the Tuesday after that will be the actual exam.
3 weeks.
That means I have I will have accumulated even more material for the test.
Yay.
Make it longer.
I have make a bigger stockpile.
Bigger chance for extra credit, right?
Well, the good thing about the next exam, well, I'm not even sure this is a good thing because the next exam or exam 2 is not going to have pre and post conditions.
This is just gonna be like.
It will be just be all tracing,
All
but
tracing.
we'll have subroutines, we'll have parameters, we'll have local variables, and we'll have return values. So from that perspective, I think some people like it better because there's no more math stuff in it. But frankly, in exam 1, I think the class did pretty good with that question. Really, the last question was the tricky one. The last one, which has a lot of conditions and whatnot, that was the tricky one. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with sub 1. Your homework assignment that was due about 10 minutes ago. Before I get started, are there any particular question before? Yep, go ahead.
On the homework, if you don't need a comments bar, will you mark us down for having one, just in case?
Because we didn't need it, right?
Like if you don't need
Actually, it does not need one.
Yeah. So
Yep.
would you mark us down if we turn it in with one?
Actually, I should not even have one. So you don't worry. If you don't have one, you're right because there's no need for one. How's that for a clear answer?
What if you do have one?
If you do have one, it's okay. It doesn't bother me. Yep. You can use your comments column for whatever you want to use it for. I mean, just remind yourself that we are returning, that we want to continue execution at a certain point. That's fine. All right. So is that okay so far? Mm-hmm. Okay. So we'll start with the precondition z. We know nothing about z. Then we're on line 10. Z gets a value of 2. Then on line 11, we invoke y. Now, when we invoke a subroutine, this is before we talk about returning a value. So that means we're still going to use return line numbers only in this case. So return line number is going to be the line right after line 11. That's going to be post. But the subroutine y, has a local variable. So you have to tell me that it has a local variable of the name y. And all local variables start with an unknown value. There we go. So the allocation of column D and also the question mark to indicate the local variable is unknown to begin with, those are important. They have point values. Once we get into the subroutine, we start off with line 7. Line 7 evaluates the right-hand side of the expression first, of the assignment first, which is what is z times 2. Z has a value of 2. 2 times 2 is 4. And then we update the value of y, which is column D, with that value. Then we move on to line 8. Line 8 is invoking x. And so we need to remember where to go back to. In this case, the return line number is going to be line 9. And we also have to, in this case, set up the by-val parameter. Because when you look at subroutine x, it has a by-val parameter I. So we need to allocate a column for I. And then what is the main difference between a by-val parameter and the local variables?
By-val starts at a value.
Yep. A known value that is specified by the invoke statement. Okay, very good. So in this case, the invoke statement says y plus 1 should be used to provide that value for I. 5, very good. So there we go. That's how we set up column E and F. If you have a comments column, everything would just be shifted 1 to the right-hand side. No big deal, not a problem. Then now we continue execution in subroutine X, which is only on line 3. Line 3 says we want to add the value of I to Z. Z still has a value of 2. 2 plus 5 is 7. We use the 7 to update in Z. Column B is now updated to a value of 7. And then we go to line 4. Line 4 is the end of a subroutine. We have 2 things to do. One is to look up the return line number. It is going to continue on line 9. And then the second thing is to deallocate the 2 columns that we allocated for this invocation. And now we're back onto line 9. When we get back to line 9, we have to do the same thing. Look up the return line number, which tells me that I have to continue at post. And then we have no use of these 2 columns anymore. Mark these 2 columns as deallocated. And we are done with this trace. Are there any questions about this trace? Question? Go ahead.
After the second invoke statement, after return line, You know how your variable doesn't start unknown because of its bival. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Because a bival parameter is just like a local variable with two differences. One, it starts with a known value, and then two, the known value is specified by the invoke statement, not the subroutine itself. Any other questions about the homework assignment?
You don't have to trace line 2 or 6 where they define the variables?
Sorry?
You don't have to trace line 2 or 6 where they define the
Okay, that's a good question. The question is, on line 2 and line 6, what do we do? Do we trace those two lines? And the answer is we do not have to. If you write, line 2 and line 6, and then they allocate the columns, that's okay. I'm not going to take any points off. But in this class, I just basically say that these two lines are not traced because they really don't do anything. They tell the compiler in the compiled language. It tells the compiler that we have to set up the columns the way we set up here. But it really is a part of entering the subroutine that does all the allocations automatically. It's not like when we get to that line, it does the allocation.
Okay.
So we don't have to trace it. If you trace it, it's no big deal. No points taken off.
Okay.
Any other questions about this homework assignment before we get back to return values? No questions? This is all good? All right. Okay. Someone can tell me what is the main confusion of return values? Are there any?
Just probably the formatting for me.
The formatting? Okay. Any other issues? Any issues with the return statement on the same line? Having an invocation on the line of return itself? Are there any specific concerns about that? That's your concern? Okay. So let's go ahead and try to address that particular concern, because I think it is not uncommon, to have a concern like that. It is a little bit confusing. So what we'll do is we'll start with a sample program that is not recursive, but it has the same type of statement. Okay. I think being recursive, makes it even worse because you're returning onto the same line after that statement. So it makes it really hard to interpret what is going on there. So we'll go ahead and use an example that does not use recursion, but we'll still have an invoke on the same line as a return. Okay? All right. So we'll go ahead and define sub. We'll just go ahead and define very simple subroutines in this case. This is sub x, and the only thing it does is it returns 1. Okay, and define sub. Just fix the indentation like that. Any questions about this particular subroutine? All it does is to return the value of 1. In other words, the invocation of sub1 can really take the place of any place where 1 as an integer is expected. Okay? You can use the invocation in an expression to add numbers. You can use it in an expression to compare numbers. Anywhere that the integer 1 can be expected, you can replace that with an invocation of subroutine x. So now we have subroutine y. Subroutine y is going to return, say, 1 plus invoke x. All right, so now we have the same type of statement as on in the recursive factorial program, because we have a line that has a return, but at the same time, the expression that it is returning also has an invoke in it. But it is not the same subroutine. This is not recursive. Y is invoking x. And just to make this a little bit more complete, we'll have subroutine z, and subroutine z is going to return 2 times invoke y. Okay. And those are our subroutines. And then what we'll do, let's make this even more interesting. And we'll just say that if invoke z does not equal to 3, then print not 3. And if All right. So we are introducing something that we haven't seen before, but I think we know how to handle it. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and focus on line 10 first. Okay? Does line 10 look kind of mysterious, or do you think, well, I kind of know what it's going to do anyway? What it is going to do is to use the return value of z and use that to compare to 3. If that value does not equal to 3, we'll go ahead and print not 3. Otherwise, there's nothing to do. All right? But we'll go ahead and trace this entire program. And every step along the way, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. Okay, it's much better to ask the questions right away than going back and going, oh, wait a minute, I think I got a question there. Okay. Yep, go ahead.
When you go through the loop, it'll print not 3 every time. Wouldn't it make more sense to say print 3 when you find the result, so it only prints out once?
Well, this program has no particular meaning. It's not trying to find something. The only purpose of this program is to illustrate the concept of that, right? So we'll go ahead and save the program first, just in case I forget to do it later. And we'll call this one, and we'll just call it return value. And then we'll trace it. Now this time it will have multiple, we will have the columns, spreading out to the right-hand side, unlike last time. This time we do have a conditional statement, so we need comments, but we don't need it right away, so I'm just going to hide it, for the time being. I just scroll that column out of the way. Then we have line number. We have no global variables, so when we start on line 10, the precondition has nothing to say because we don't have any globals. Yep.
Do you have to do a comment section?
The comment is here.
Okay.
I just hid it because we don't need it right away. Okay, very good. So we'll go ahead and start execution on line 10. Well, right away we have a big question here. How do we handle this? Well, first of all, we know that line 10 is the beginning of a conditional statement. What do you have to do when you have a conditional statement? In general, you have to make a decision, right? You evaluate a condition. Exactly, you have to decide whether the expression is true or false. If it is true, you go one way. If it is false, you go the other way. Can I make a decision right now in the trace?
No.
No, I don't have all the information that I need to make that decision. Why don't I have all the decisions? I have not invoked z yet. So maybe I should do that first. Okay? And when I invoke z, should I go ahead?
Should we put the if statement in the comments?
Yep, that's the next question. But let me ask another question first. Should I use return line number or should I use return info in this case? In other words, return info. Why am I using return info? Because I'm going back to the same line. There's unfinished business on the same line. Very good. So now we know that we have to go back to line 10 when the subroutine is all done. What else on line 10 do we have to do? We still have the comparison to do, and then we still have the conditional statement to evaluate. Okay, so there are two things to do. We are just going to take care of the invocation of z. So when you specify the return info, you basically just say, okay, whatever the invocation we're dealing with right now, replace that with a question mark, but then everything else on that line still has to be done. Is that okay? In other words, I just copied and pasted line 10 and only replaced the invocation itself with a question mark. Is that part okay? And that's universal. It doesn't matter where the invocation is. If you have to deal with the invocation before you can proceed any further, just copy and paste the entire line, replace the invocation itself with a question mark because that's a placeholder for the return value, and that's how you set up a return info cell. We don't have anything else to set up here because there are no local variables and no parameters. All right, so once return info is all set up, we continue execution in the subroutine. This is on line 8. And on line 8, what the statement itself on line 8, okay, let me just use a mouse here to point to there. The statement on line 8 is a return statement. In other words, if we are ready to when we are ready to execute a return statement, we would like to copy and paste the return info cell and change the question mark to a particular value. Are we ready to do that?
No.
We're not ready because the expression itself, which is 2 times invoke y, has its own subroutine invocation. So what do we have to do? We have to allocate another column for another subroutine call. So we have to use column D in this case, label it as return info, because now we are invoking y, subroutine y. But in the return info cell, we have to say, when we are done with invoking y, when y is all done, we have to get back onto line 8, because we have 2 unfinished business on that line. One is the multiplication by 2, and the second one is the actual return action on that line. So are we doing okay so far with the setup of column D? Any questions? Have I changed the way I handle subroutine invocation? It's the same thing, okay? So that's the most important part, is to recognize what the mechanism is and then just apply the same mechanism, the same method every time you have a subroutine invocation. All right, so after line 8, we are now in subroutine Y. Line 5 is the only line in subroutine Y that actually does something useful. Well, guess what? It is also a return statement, but I cannot do the return just yet because the expression that I'm returning has an invoke X in it, and I don't know what it is. Okay, so we have to do exactly the same thing again. Allocate another column, label it, oops, return info, and this time I have to remind myself, after we invoke X, we have to go back onto line 5, because there are 2 things on line 5 that I have not done yet. The second one is to return a value, but the first thing I really need to do is to finish up the addition. Are we doing okay so far? And now we are in subroutine X on line 2. Return 1. Finally, right? we can deal with that right away. Because the expression 1 does not have any invocations anymore, we know exactly what to do when we say return 1. Okay. Well, to execute a return 1 statement means that we are going to use the rightmost return info column, copy and paste the content of that cell, replace the question mark, which is a placeholder, with the value that I'm returning. In this case, it is 1. This is completely mechanical. Okay, I'm just blindly going to the return info cell, copy, paste, change the question mark to the value that I'm returning, and I'm done. Should I go ahead and say that, well, but I know what is 1 plus 1. Let's change that to 2.
Not there.
Nope, not there. We do not evaluate anything at this point. We only change the question mark to a known value, and that's it. That's the extent of this particular return statement. What about returning 2? What else should we be changing from a question mark to 2? Do we worry about that at this point? Nope, we don't worry about that at this point, because our job as executing line 2 is already done. Everything else we'll deal with it later. So after line 2 is done, we go to line 3. Line 3 is the end of a subroutine. So that means we have to remind ourselves where to go to. So this time we have to remind ourselves that we have to go to line 5. Now, if you really want to make this more clear and you want to do it this way, that's fine with me. Okay, I'll show you what I mean by that. In this case, we know that we are going back to line 5, and line 5 now looks like this. If you want to do it this way, that's fine with me. In other words, it is not only saying that we are continuing onto line 5, but it also says right away what line 5 looks like at this point when we get back to line 5. Okay.
You put those in the comments last time.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. You can put it into comments, you can put it into the line number, because we just need a reminder of, okay, we are going back to line 5, but line 5 really doesn't look like this anymore, because it looks more like row 11 of the trace. You can put it into the comments part, you can put it into the line number part. That really doesn't matter to me one way or another. This is after all, pseudocode tracing. If it is clear to you, it is clear to me, I know what you're doing, it's good. All right. Well, after that, after we make use of column E really has no purpose anymore. So we'll go ahead and deallocate it. Just like that. And now we are on line 5 again, but line 5 is return 1 plus 1. Okay? Return 1 plus 1. We have to evaluate 1 plus 1, it becomes 2. In other words, we are actually returning 2. What do we do when we execute return 2? Look for the return info cell, copy, paste, change the question mark to the value that we are returning. What are we returning again? 2. Very good. And we're done. In other words, we are executing this statement, and as a result of executing the statement on line 5, the return info cell about line 8 is changed. This is the action, this is the result. Are we good on that? All right, so it's very important because we have return on both sides, which one is which one. One is an action, and the other one is merely the result of the action. All right, well, after the action is done, we move on. In this case, we move on to line 6, and we'll do the same thing. On line 6, we look up the return info cell. It tells us that we have to continue on to line 8, and line 8 now looks like this, return 2 times 2. So we copy that into our line number column, and then we say we have no use of this particular return info cell anymore. We deallocate the whole column, and now we continue execution on line 8. Line 8 now looks like this, return 2 times 2. 2 times 2 is 4, so we are returning a value of 4. So when we return a value of 4, what do? We copy and paste the return info cell. This time it is column C, it's the only one left. And then we change the question mark to 4. We don't worry about this yet, okay? We don't say false, okay? We don't even know, we don't care what is the result of the comparison. We just replace the question mark with 4, and we are done with executing line 8. After line 8, we get to line 9. And line 9, once again, has 2 things to do. One is to remind ourselves what we are supposed to do. So we have to say, oh, we are supposed to continue on to line 10 after this. So copy and paste the return info cell, the entire thing. And then we indicate that this column is no longer in use. So now we are back onto line 10. But line 10 now looks like this. If 4 is different from 3, can we evaluate that?
Yes.
Okay, we can evaluate this. We know the result. So on the comments column, this time I would say 4 does not equal 3 is true. Right? Because now that we actually have values to compare, we can indicate the result of the comparison. So we say 4 does not equal to 3 is true, and then we move on to line 11 because the condition is true. Now line 11 is really just a regular line, so we're not going to say line 11 is print not 3, and then the result is printing not 3, and then we're done. Get the post. So I'm changing from my class notes a little bit to make it more clear, because in my class notes I simply use line 5 on row 11 of the trace. I merely mention 8 on row 13 and 10 on row 15. But to make this more clear so that we can separate what the action is as opposed to the result of the action, we'll just go ahead and copy the return info cell entirely to the line number column, so that way we know exactly what we are supposed to do when we get back to that line. Yep.
For us doing it, you said earlier you're okay with putting return 1 plus 1 in the comment section versus putting it in the line number. Is that okay?
You mean this part here?
Yeah, like on row 11.
Yeah, you can put this onto the comments column, but you still have to indicate 5 here.
Yep.
Because we are getting back onto line 5.
That just seems a little cleaner.
Yep. It's up to you, which way you want to do it, it's fine. Yep. Any questions at this point? No questions? All right, very good. So we'll go ahead and save this one. And then now we are going to talk about something that's old already, but we'll do it in a new way. Arrays. Do you guys still remember arrays? Yeah.
What are those things?
Those things. So what do you think would happen when we mix and match arrays with subroutines?
A big mess.
Not necessarily. I mean, they work really, really well together. Okay? They work really, really well together, and you can use arrays as parameters. Okay? So we'll go ahead and look at one example like this. We'll start with something that we already know, that we are really, really familiar with, and then we'll move on to something that is like, whoa, that is something strange. Well, hopefully you guys will feel the rest of the class really boring, because that means you really get all the ideas, all the concepts down already. All right, so we'll start with something that we know already. So we'll say define sub. Okay, this is just a subroutine called find. Okay, and we'll say by rev. We'll do it by val first. Okay, by val a, it is an array, just to be really extra clear that it is an array. And then we'll say by val k. K is just a value. And we'll say local I. Okay. In other words, we are trying to find whether the value k is in the array A or not. Do we know how to do that?
Yes.
We can use binary search, but only if the array is already sorted. Yeah. Let's just say that the array is not sorted, or we cannot be sure whether it is sorted or not, so we have to go for linear search. No other way to do it. Okay. Well, linear search is pretty simple, because we have to initialize I to 0 first, and then we say, while I is less than bar a bar, and a bracket I does not equal to the value that we are looking for, do the following. Yep.
I have a question about LibreOffice. Every time I put in I and capitalize it,
Yes.
how do you
change
change that?
How do you stop it? Yep. You go to Tools, you go to Autocorrect Options, and if I remember correctly, there you have to find the entry in the replace table. So you have to look all the way down to I here. I's not. That's funny. But you probably have an entry here of lowercase I is mapped to uppercase I. You just have to highlight that entry, and then you delete it, and it will not replace it anymore. Okay. But for the homework, if you use uppercase I instead of lowercase I, that's fine. I can read it.
It just looks like
It
throws me off because it looks like a 1 or an L.
Ah. Okay. All right. So what do we do in the loop? We say I gets I plus 1. We just move on to the next element in the array. Now this time we have to be a little bit more careful, because we have to return a value. It's not enough just to get out of the loop, because we have to tell the invoke statement, did we find the value k in the array? Just getting out of the loop doesn't help at all, right? It doesn't give me an answer. Is it there or not? So we have to return a particular value, and we'll just have to say, return, and in this case, I is less than bar a bar, because if I is still less than bar a bar, having a match has to be the only reason why I am exiting. And define sub, fix the indentation. Is that part okay? I mean, does everybody understand what I just said? Why the return value of I is less than bar a bar is the same as whether it was found or not. Look at the condition. Look at the condition of the pre-checking loop here. Let's focus on this statement here. While I is less than bar a bar and a bracket I does not equal to k, do the following. In other words, I need both of these conditions to be true to stay in the loop. Is that correct? Okay. What does it mean when I'm out of the loop? When I'm on line 9, what does it mean? The condition of the loop has to be false. Okay, let me just let me just play it out like this. Okay, this is line 6. It specifies a condition where the condition has to be true to stay in the loop. Because while is saying as long as, okay, as long as I is less than bar a bar and a bracket I does not equal to k, do the following. So if I am on line 9 already, that means the condition of line 6 has to be false. Is that making any sense? Okay. What if I know that I is less than bar a bar is actually true? If I is less than bar a bar is true, what is the only other reason I can get out of the loop? I found it, exactly. So that's why returning I is less than bar a bar is returning whether the element or the value k was found in the array or not. It's a confirmation of whether it was found. Yep.
So you're going to be returning a Boolean variable?
I'm returning a Boolean, yes. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say don't change invoke for this to invoke.
Invoke? Well, we haven't really talked about the invoke statement
It's
yet.
just a tablet or a template, sorry.
This is a subroutine. We have not really talked about how we are going to invoke the context of the invocation. We haven't said anything about it yet.
What happens when I is 1 less than bar a bar and then it wasn't true? So you go into the loop and then it becomes bar a bar. So what happens? Would you still return I?
Oh, very good. So let's play that out. Okay, the question was, what if, the element, the value is actually not in the array? That's basically what you're asking.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it is not in the array, the last iteration will bump I up to bar a bar itself. So that means, I is bar a bar is less than bar a bar is false. So we get out of the loop.
Then you would still return I is less than bar a bar.
We'll still return the result of the comparison. But remember, I is actually bar a bar at this point. So you'll be returning the same thing as bar a bar is less than bar a bar, which is false.
So you return false.
So you return false, which is the correct answer because k is not in the array in that particular case. Okay. So this part, which is the design of the algorithm, that's a little bit harder to teach than just the raw mechanisms of each statement because designing an algorithm means that you actually have to figure out the logic, the stuff that I just explained. And that part, it really just comes with experience and exposure. The more programs you look at, the more experience you get, and the more you build up your own repertoire of these constructs as you encounter more programs and more algorithms. All right, so we'll do the rest of this program. We need an invoke, so we'll go ahead and just deal with it here. So we'll say, well, since I do not like global variables, we'll once again use a stub subroutine. And in the stub subroutine, we'll have a local variable, which is an array. And in this case, I'll just say this is an array of, let's say 2 integers. And then we'll just say, we'll initialize the array right here. A bracket 0, gets a value of 4. A bracket 1 gets a value of 1. And then we'll go ahead and invoke the statement. But we'll put the invoke inside the conditional statement. So we'll say if invoke find, and then we have to pass the parameters. In this case, we can use a to specify a. It is passed by value. And then we'll use, k3 to specify parameter k. Then print, yay. Else we print dope. How do you spell dope? Like the Homer Simpson dope.
D apostrophe OH
Huh?
exclamation mark.
D.
D apostrophe OH then exclamation mark.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dope.
There you go.
It has to be very abrupt.
Those captions help.
According to the official guide to The Simpsons. All right. All right. So in the main part of the program, we just have to invoke the stub subroutine, and this way I can avoid the use of global variables altogether. All right. So this is a program a little bit longer than the usual, but it does demonstrate a few concepts that we think we understand because we can probably reason it out, what to do. but we haven't really done it yet. Okay, so it's an extension of what we know already. We know a lot of pieces already. We just have to put the pieces together to get this one done. And it's probably a good idea to save it now. Oops, wrong date. Okay, so we'll call this one linear search because it is a linear search algorithm. We'll start with sheet 2, and this is our line number. We need a column for comments. All right. Precondition, nothing to say because we do not have any global variables. And the beginning of the program is really just the invoke stub subroutine on line 21. Invoke stub, well, should we use return line number or should we use return info here?
Return line number.
It's your call. I mean, you can really use either one. If you use return info, you can still say post in return info. There's nothing wrong with saying, oh, by the way, we're not returning to the same line. This is where we are returning to. So return info is a more general method of specifying where am I going back to. But in this case, you can easily just use return line number because that's basically what we have been doing for the past few weeks. So it's fine in this case to use return line number because we do not have a return value to deal with in this case. Okay, but we do have a few problems here. Okay, I forgot to indent this line, so let me fix that. Okay. The next question is, we have a local variable called a. We know about how to deal with local variables, but this time a is not a single variable. The variables that we have been dealing with, like I and k of the other subroutine, they're called scalars. S-C-A-L-A-R. Okay, scalar, which means it is a small single individual item. A is not a single individual item. It has components, it has elements, it's an array. But the way we treat it is the same way as everything else. Okay? How many columns do you think array A is going to take up? Two columns? All right, fine. We'll just go ahead and allocate column D and column E both for A. So column D is going to be the storage for bracket 0, and column E is going to be the storage of bracket 1. Cool. So we have just combined the concepts of arrays with the concept of local variables. But we are missing one thing about local variables. What is so special about local variables? How? Unknown, exactly. Each one has to start with an unknown value. So don't forget that part, because even with an array, we just have to put more question mark, one question mark per column, to remind us that we really don't know what the value of those particular elements. All right, so now that we have that part done, we can continue execution. Line 13 is easy. A bracket 0 gets 4. We update column D. And then on line 14, we update column E with 1. And we're done. We're now on to line 15. Line 15 is a conditional statement, or the beginning of a conditional statement. But we can't really decide what to do yet, right? Because we don't know whether the expression is true or false. The expression is the invoke statement. Okay? But we don't know what we are supposed to do until we come back from the invocation, in this case of find, the subroutine find. Okay, so we'll go ahead and deal with that. In other words, we're going to actually make the subroutine call. In this case, should we use return line number or return info? Return info, because we are definitely returning to the same line, and then we have to indicate what else on that line do we have to do. Okay, return info. And I just basically repeat the entire line. This is on line 15. And the invocation itself is replaced by a question mark as a placeholder. But everything else, I will just keep it the way it is on the original line 15. Are we doing okay so far with how we set up return info? What else do we have to do? Let's take a look at return in at find. And what else do we have to do? It has parameters, right? All right. Well, okay. What are we going to do this time?
Establish another A is global to subroutine.
Okay, Exactly. How many columns do we have to use just for parameter A itself? 2 columns. Very good. So we have array A has 2 columns, bracket 0, bracket 1, because it's a copy of the other one. What am I going to put here at, in column G? It's supposed to be a clone, a copy, right? So this is 4, and this is 1. Are we doing okay so far? We have just combined the concept of arrays with the concept of local variables and passing by value.
So when you use the invoke statement on line 15, it says invoke find A gets A. You're really just copying the array from stub. Oh my goodness. Okay.
Correct. It is just copying.
I was wondering what that did.
Well, the first A refers to the A of stub. The second A refers to the A of find.
Okay.
So if I had picked different names, then they would have been different. The names would be different, but the action would still be the same.
All right.
Okay, we have 2 more things to set up. We have parameter k, but parameter k is the easy one because we simply use a value of 3 to specify parameter k. And then we have a local variable I, which starts with a an unknown value. So now this is what we have regarding the setup for the for that invocation.
I have a formatting question.
Yep, go ahead.
For our own purposes, would it be okay if we drop down the 3 and the
Yeah.
question mark
Yeah.
to where they, okay.
Yeah, if you want everything to line up, that's good.
Can you cross it out?
Sorry?
Can you remove the 3 and question? Yeah.
Like that?
Yeah.
Or we can do something even better. Yeah, we can make it fancy. This is a spreadsheet. You don't have to do it that way, okay? You just don't waste your time if you don't know how to merge cells. I mean, that's not the point of your homework assignment. So I know. How many people have spent too much time with a PowerPoint presentation? You're taking a class, your teacher says, okay, use PowerPoint for your presentation, and then before you know it, you were playing with all the different animations, all the clip art and whatnot, and it's like 5 hours down the line, you only have 2 pages done, right? But it has really fancy animation.
Those 2 pages look amazing, though.
You can do a lot of interesting things with PowerPoint. PowerPoint actually can replace Flash in a certain way. I mean, for certain type of things, you can do it in PowerPoint, and it would be easier to do it in PowerPoint than do it in Flash. But since I'm not a Microsoft fan, you can do it also in
LibreOffice.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Impress. It's called Impress in LibreOffice.
Yeah, you can do it in Keynote and on Mac too, or in LibreOffice.
Yep. All right. So now we are in the subroutine. The rest of the subroutine is actually the really boring part because we already know how to do this. So we start with line 5. Line 5 initializes I to 0. Then we go to line 6. It is the beginning of the loop. So now we have to evaluate the condition. I is less than bar A bar is true. A bracket I does not equal to K is true. The whole thing is true. I'm not going to display the whole thing because I think most people already know what that part is going to do. So because the condition is true, we go into the subroutine. We go onto line 7, and line 7 is going to add 1 to I goes from 0 to 1. We go back to line 6. The condition is still true. We go to line 7 again. I gets incremented to 2. We go back to line 6. The condition is now finally false. And that means we should get out of the loop and continue execution on line 9. Oops, wrong window.
I have a question.
Yep.
So for that part, when it's false, don't you just have to say the first part of it and then?
Oh, you're right. You caught me. Because it is using short circuit evaluation. Yep. In fact, when I is not less than bar A bar anymore, any attempt to evaluate the right-hand side is not good. Because it's going to access an element out of the range of the indexes. All right, very good. You guys caught me. Okay, now we are on line 9. line 9 says we want to return the expression of I is less than bar A bar. I has a value of 2, bar A bar is 2 as well. 2 is less than 2 is false, so we're just returning a value of false. Is that okay? I mean, can we return false? I mean, it's not 1, 2, 5, or any integers. It is a value, right? If it is a value, we can return it. If it's a known determined value, we can return it. And false is definitely known, so we just go ahead and replace the question mark with false. That's it. Are we doing okay so far with line 9? So line 9 is done. We now move on to line 10. Once again, has 2 things to do. One is to say, okay, where are we supposed to go back to? Oh, we're supposed to go back to line 15, and line 15 now looks like this. Okay, copy and paste it. And then the second thing we have to do is to say, okay, none of these are needed anymore. This gets a little bit tricky because the way I set it up. So we'll have to mark, it's putting the K and the I down there. Okay, we have to.
That's how it's set up, yeah.
We just have to split it again. There we go.
Fired.
Well, not quite. You know, it's still okay. All right. So now we're back onto line 15. Questions?
So when we're doing this, we can just deallocate A, and we don't have to worry about specifying what elements of A we're deallocating, because as soon as you deallocate A, all of it's going to.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. But it is important that you understand, you know, what is deallocated.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So we'll just go ahead and expand this one a little bit more because now we have the room to do that. On line 15, it is now becoming if false then. Okay. All right. Do we know how to do line 15? I mean, what are we going to do? It's not a comparison. It's not any expression. It's just false. Well, think about it again with a conditional statement. At the junction of a conditional statement, you have 2 branches. If the condition is true, you go this way. If the condition is false, you go the other way. I'm saying the condition is false. Where do we go?
Null.
We go to the else part. Very good. But what am I going to put here? It's really easy. False is false. The first false refers to the expression in the statement itself. The second false is saying what it is. What is it? But false is false. I mean, there's no other way to say it. Right? So after that, we go to the else portion, which is on line 18. We execute line 18. You know, your program is going to print out, you know, great. And we are done with the subroutine stuff. So go to line 20. And line 20 is going to deallocate the columns that we just allocated. Well, we have to remember where to continue first. We're going to continue onto post. And then after that, we can deallocate the columns. It's not bad at all. I mean, it's really stuff that we know already. It's just extending what we know to the newer concepts. Are we doing okay so far with this? Kind of? Sorry?
I said more or less.
More or less. It's an extension. It's an extension to what we already know. It's just adding a new critical dimension to what we already know. We doing okay with this?
Can we expect that this is what the test will look like?
Oh yeah.
Can you make sure to post this to the website?
Sure. Yeah, just send an email to me to remind me to upload it. Yep, I'll go ahead and upload it.
There's gonna be a lot of writing on the test.
It won't be too bad.
I'm thinking, you know, in the test, instead of making you, do the entire trace, I can just have a trace done to a certain part, and you just tell me what the next line is. Something like that, can be set up too. Yep.
So you're going to have a practice exam that we can work on over spring break?
Yes. So the Tuesday after spring break, we'll have a practice test, and then after the 1 week after the practice test, we'll have the actual test.
But is there one area that you can work on over spring break?
I believe so, but it's not going to have the same format, because I'm changing the way I ask the questions so that it won't be very.
Same kind of idea.
Sorry.
Same idea. Though.
Same idea. You still have to understand and know the same things. It's just that you don't have to finish the entire trace. So this way, it really helps from my grading perspective because I can actually use all or none type of grading because either your next line to trace is entirely correct or it is wrong. But if it is wrong, it's not going to affect the grade for your next question. So you will end up with more individual questions. However, since they're individual, that means if you mess up one question, it's not going to affect down the stream and say, oh, okay, your other questions or the other points you will also lose at the same time.
Practice questions on Moodle?
There are some practice questions, but not in this form yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So can we find a place to download this?
I have to upload it at the end of the class.
Okay.
Yep. All right.
Is it going to be uploaded at the end of class?
I have to upload it at the end of the class so that you can download it.
But are you going to do it right after the end of the class, or we have to wait a couple hours?
Probably have to wait wait a little bit because I do have a few things to take care of right away after the class. Send an email to me to remind me.
You have a life outside of this class.
Unfortunately, yes.
Sadly.
That should be fortunately, yes.
It depends on what that live is.
Oh.
We'll hear the kids.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, teaching here sometimes feels like vacation.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Formatting that you're using for this class is mainly for this class, right?
Mainly for this class.
Like the
Are we special?
what is it?
Tracing and stuff?
Yeah, like the tracing and stuff like that. The symbols. There you go. Symbols. Are they mainly for this class?
They're mainly for this class, but it is kind of necessary. I make pseudocode a little bit more verbose than it has to be, in order to make the concepts, extra clear in this class. But pseudocode is pseudocode. When you read pseudocode from another source, they will look very similar. It's just that certain things won't look exactly the same.
Okay. I've seen it elsewhere, and some of the methods or symbols you're using completely different than some of the other places I've seen.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So this time we'll deal with another type of subroutine or another type of parameters, but we'll also use it in conjunction with arrays. So this time we'll say swap, okay, define sub swap, and we'll say this time we pass by reference instead. A is an array, and we have T as we need one more parameter. Bival I as an integer, bival j as an integer, and then local variable t as an integer. Okay, I haven't really talked about types yet, so I really should not use the integer part here. All right, so we'll stick with what we know, what we have already dealt with. So this time I'll do the swap operation. It's the same thing, except this time we're dealing with, array elements. A bracket I, and then we have A bracket I gets the value of A bracket J, A bracket J gets the value of T, and define sub. So that's my subroutine right there. And then I will define once again a stub subroutine. Define sub stub local array A. Array of, we can make it 3, it doesn't matter how many. And then we'll go ahead and initialize the array first. So A bracket 0. Okay, let me just change the name of this A just to show you that the name of this array has nothing to do with the array of the other one, the other array. So this is array B. B bracket 0 gets a value of 7. B bracket 1 gets a value of 5. B bracket 2 gets a value of 3. Invoke swap. I use A to specify, B to specify parameter A. I use, I don't know, 0 to specify I. Maybe I use 2 to specify J. And define sub. Invoke stub. There we go. We have our program. this one is unique and different from the previous one because this time we are passing an array by reference, okay, which is a little bit different. Now this is also a good time to kind of pause and stop a little bit and talk about in C, which is what you're going to learn in C in cisp300. In C and C++, the only way to pass an array as a parameter is to pass it by reference. Okay, in other words, what we just talked about in the previous slide, in the previous example, is not going to work in C. C does not have passing array by value, period. So this instead is what you really need to know. Other programming languages, does have passing arrays by value, but not in C.
Could you give an example of one? You can do that in PHP, right? You pass everything through the function. Right?
Say again?
Well, like in PHP, everything is like local scope, right? Like in a function. So what would be an example of a language that you could pass an array?
In C, you can pass arrays, just not by value. You must pass arrays by reference.
Oh, okay.
But in other script particularly with scripting languages, when you pass an array, it is always passed by value. You're passing a copy of the original item.
Not the reference.
Especially with, let's say, Visual Basic, when you pass an array, it is passed by, you can do it either way in Visual Basic. So if you modify the array that is passed by value, you're modifying a copy of the array. The original array doesn't get affected. But in C, because it is always passing an array by reference, whatever change you make to the array in the subroutine is going to affect the original item because the subroutine has the original item. We'll demonstrate it in this case. Okay, array passed by reference. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started with this one. It does not really need a comments column, so we'll skip that one. So we'll just start with line number. Precondition, there's nothing to say because I do not have any local variables. We start on line 17. It calls or invokes stub. So now we have return line number. It is post, and then we have to set up stub. This time, array A or array B, excuse me, I always refer to array A. Array B has 3 elements. So we have bracket 0, bracket 1, and bracket 2. And they're all unknown because these are all local variables. Oops. Are we doing okay at this point? Same stuff as last time so far. We're in the subroutine. So now we start execution on line 12. B bracket 0 gets a value of 7. Line 13, B bracket 1 gets a value of 5. Line 14, B bracket 2 gets a value of 3. No big deal, we did the same thing pretty much last time. Now we have line 15. Line 15 is the one that we really have to be careful about. Once again, we can just use return line number because swap does not actually return a value. All it does is to do some operation and then it returns. So it's perfectly fine to use return line number and then just indicate the line after the invoke as the return line number, which is line 16. And then we move on and specify the parameters. Let's deal with the easy ones first. Okay, let's deal with parameter I, parameter j, and local variable t. Local variable t as a local variable starts with an unknown value. J gets a value of 2 because that's how it is specified in the invoke statement. And I gets a value of 0, and that's also because of the invoke statement itself. So these 3 columns are pretty easy to handle. The question is, how are we going to handle the column labeled A because it is passed by reference? But first of all, is it a single column or is it 3 columns? That's the first question. Okay? It is one single column. In other words, when you pass an array by reference, you are giving the subroutine a single reference. You're giving the array a single item, but in that single reference, somewhere, somehow, you are conveying that, okay, whenever you refer to A, go ahead and refer to column C, D, and E instead. Okay, so this time, it is going to be AKA columns C to columns C to E. It is not one column per reference. It is a single reference to multiple columns. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just wondering about that when I was watching you. I was like, I don't know what he's going to do with that.
Yeah, because this you can really go in either way, but the implementation is that it is a single reference.
It's just the pass by reference and then the array together. I was like, what are you going to do with that? You know, so
It's because the array itself is one single quote-unquote object. It is a single item from the programming language perspective. The entire array is one single thing. So you only have one reference to that one single thing. Even though it can be broken up into components, it is still considered as one single thing. So it only has one reference to it. Yep.
I mean, maybe it's just automatic in the programming language, I don't know, but how does, I mean, I'm assuming A sub, or A bracket 0 is going to reference B bracket 0, and vice versa.
Correct.
But don't you have to tell it to reference those? Because then theoretically, couldn't A bracket 1 reference B bracket 0?
Well, when we get to that point, we'll see what what we can do to handle it. Okay. All right, but the most important part is to remember it is a single reference. Okay, even though the item that we are referencing has multiple items inside it, when you pass by reference, it is a single reference. Okay, so now we move on into the subroutine. Well, the rest of the subroutine are fairly, just tedious. On line 6, we make a copy of A bracket I. So you just look it up. What is A? A is also known as column C to E. In column C to E, which one has index 0? Okay, column C is index 0. It has a value of 7. So T gets a value of 7 because of that. On line 7, we want to refer to A bracket J first. J has a value of 2. A is also known as column C to column E. When you look at column C to column E, which one has an index of 2? Column E has an index of 2. It has a value of 3. So the right-hand side of line 7 is 3. The left-hand side of line 7 is A bracket I. Once again, A refers to column C to column E. I is 0. When you look at column C to column E, column C is the one that has an index of 0. So we are referring to column C when on the left-hand side of line 7. So that's why column C is the one that is updated to 3. Are we doing okay so far with this? Because we are combining, kind of strange way, the concept of array indexing with passing by reference. Are we doing okay? Kind of. I'm trying to think of an analogy right now, so I'm not zoning out. Okay, here's a picture. What is an array? An array is a box, right? Remember the box analogy? So in this case, array B, which occupies columns C, D, and E, is a box with 3 coffee mugs. Okay, so we'll go ahead and draw a box. And this time, the box opens up, this way, so we can, access the cup from the front. Okay, this is, this box, has multiple names. One of the names is, it is known as local variable B from the perspective of subroutine stub. Okay. Is that okay? Index 0, index 1, index 2. Is that okay? So now what we do is we draw a Stargate. Okay? We draw a Stargate with its own, what is that device called for dialing?
It's scary.
There's an abbreviation.
DHD.
DHD?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a DHD here. All right? All right?
It's a good thing we're all geeks, right?
Huh?
Symbols.
Symbols. Yeah, I can only remember this one. All right, so here's one, and this is real. I mean, this is actually occupying, physical space. Okay? remember, when you pass by reference, it is just another way to get to the same item. So this is in subroutine stub. Subroutine stub actually owns this particular box. Okay, it allocates the space, it makes the box, and it makes the mugs, and it owns everything there. So here is subroutine swap. What you are giving subroutine swap is the address of that Stargate. Okay, so how many addresses are you giving to swap? Do we have 3 different addresses, or do we only have 1? If we only have 1, because it is a single Stargate. Okay, so from the perspective of subroutine swap, which has its own Stargate and has its own dialing device, DHD, it just needs one information. It just needs one piece of information. What is the address of the other Stargate? Right? It dials in. Yep, go ahead.
No.
Okay, so it dials in, and the wormhole is established. The 2 Stargates are now connected. So that means, when what's the name of the commander of Stargate SG-1?
Oh, Jack O'Neill.
Jack O'Neill, yes.
MacGyver.
I really like him. MacGyver, yeah. Somehow, I'm still having problems associating MacGyver with, O'Neill. I mean, they're just different personalities, just a little bit different. MacGyver never uses guns. McNeil would not hesitate. Okay, so anyway, so let's say Jack O'Neill wants to drink coffee, right? So he extends his arm into this wormhole at about this position. What's going to happen? It goes through the Stargate, it comes out here, he grabs, guess what?
Grab the box.
Grabs a cup, right? A mug, grab a particular thing in the mug. That's what's happening when we are executing statement number 6, 7, and 8. That's what we are doing. Okay? We are accessing another item that actually belongs to somebody else through a Stargate. But to have the Stargate to establish the connection, it just needs one single address, which is our reference. Are we? Yeah, go ahead.
Are we swapping 2 values and 3 values?
We are swapping 2 values. So we're not done yet. We are not done yet. So this is the first one. And then what happens on line 8? Line 8 says we want to copy the value of t, which is a local variable in stub, to a bracket j. So what are we doing when we are doing a bracket j? When we're doing a bracket j, this is what we are doing. We understand that the other side has a box with 3 items. Yes? So if you are Jack O'Neill, you're looking into the event horizon, but you already know what the other side has. It's a box. You already know the box has 3 items. Like so. So this time we know we are accessing the 3rd item because we are accessing bracket 2. So Jack O'Neill is just extending his arm into the Stargate at the position where the 3rd item is located. But when his arm materializes on the other side, it would be grabbing the item with index 2. Is that making any sense? The most important part is the understanding or the agreement between swap and the stop subroutine. Both have to know that this is an array. Once you know it is an array, you can actually inquire how big is the array, how many elements do we have, and so on and so forth. And that's why on line 8, we are copying T to A bracket J. A is also known as column C to column E. Within column C to column E is the one with the index 2. So we are updating column E to 7. Okay? So now let's go ahead and finish it. We just need another 30 seconds or so to finish this whole thing. On line 9, we terminate this particular subroutine. We look up the return line number. Oh, we are terminating the other one. So we look up the return line number. We have to continue on to line 16. And then we have no use of these columns anymore. say, strike through. So what we are doing is we are destroying everything in that room, okay, including the Stargate. Now we're back onto line 16. Line 16 is also the end of a subroutine. So this time we are deallocating these columns, and also make a note that we have to return to post. And then remember, these columns are no longer allocated, and we are done. Okay. So remember the Stargate analogy. Yes.
Can you just print out everything? Can I just take it? That's why we have video.
Yeah, before you close that, just for formatting's sake, why couldn't, I mean, so like if you merge these cells here, right? Because we understand that B is a single variable. We understand that A is a single variable. And within that variable, there's subsets. Right, in the trace is 3 columns, in the program
You can see it as one single variable.
So couldn't we make the columns for A, bracket 0, bracket 1, bracket 2, and then anytime we update it, here we update there, as long as we're updating both sides?
Because the reference is really only one single item. It has to do with how things are actually represented in the real programming language. So I want this class to be as close as possible to the actual mechanism. So that later on when you take another class, for instance, when you take cisp300, when we talk about the same concept but in a different context, you don't have to say, oh, okay, so I have to undo what I learned in T300 and then relearn it, in cisp310.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks.
Just a quick question. Okay.
I was just wondering,